By staying until the end of this story, you're already helping women who are struggling in life. All of the revenue from this video will be donated to women in need. Please subscribe to the channel and share in the comments. Are you facing any challenges in your own life? Who knows, maybe the next story will be yours. When the verdict was read, I felt the weight of 65 years finally lift from my chest. The judge's voice was calm, almost gentle, as he declared that I owed nothing. No million-dollar compensation, no more nights waiting for letters that threatened my peace. And then, almost as quietly, came the second decision. The court ordered the arrest of my daughter, Ilari, and her husband, Eric, for the failed kidnapping and ransom attempt that had nearly taken my grandchildren from me. The courtroom fell silent outside. Rain was beginning to fall, slow, deliberate, as if the sky itself needed to wash something away. I didn't cry. There are no tears left for victories like these. I only sat there, breathing, realizing that for the first time in years I was free, not from sickness nor from debt, but from the fear that had wrapped around my life like a second skin. Once, I was the woman who lived on borrowed air and borrowed time. Hospital corridors knew my footsteps better than my own home. My hands trembled from medicine. My pockets were filled with overdue bills and letters from friends I could no longer repay. Yet somehow, between the coughing and the sleepless nights, I kept two small boys alive, my grandsons Milo and Leo, their laughter the only proof that love could still survive ruin. Now, standing beneath the gray sky outside the courthouse, I felt something unfamiliar. Not joy, not triumph, but a quiet kind of release. Life, for once, had stopped demanding payment from me. And maybe that was all the miracle I would ever need. My name is Alatra. 65 years of life, 65 seasons of rain, and perhaps just as many times I have asked myself why people must walk through every small sorrow before gathering a little peace. The room I live in now has a window facing the old neighborhood, where every morning the sunlight slips through the wrinkled curtains and falls upon a faded photo of my daughter and me. The photo was taken when Ilari had just turned 10. She had gently curly hair, bright eyes, and a smile that seemed to believe the world was still whole. And me, thin, pale, my arm around her shoulders, but my eyes already dim, as if afraid of something to come. Perhaps even then I sensed that between my daughter and me, there would be a crack that could never be mended. My life has never been a straight road since childhood. I've been familiar with the smell of antiseptic, the rust of hospital beds, the sound of doctors' shoes echoing down long hallways, and the hiss of ventilators like lullabies. I'd had lung disease since I was 15, an old illness that clung to me like a curse. For many years I lay in those white rooms, breathing in the damp scent of oxygen and listening to needles clink into metal trays. I survived each coughing fit, survived the taste of blood, and survived the loneliness of someone forever separated from the crowd. But what exhausted me most wasn't the sickness, it was the way people looked at me. Half pity, half weariness. That look made me understand that even while I was alive, I was little more than a burden fading quietly in the corner of life. I married at 23, not out of love but because people said, a sickly woman needs someone by her side. The man, Ilari's father, was a gentle, quiet carpenter whose hands always smelled of sawdust and varnished. We lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, where at night we could hear insects and trains passing by. In the early years I thought I had found a place to breathe in peace. But illness never let me go. Each time I was hospitalized, he would sit silently on the wooden bench outside, head bowed, hat in his hands. I remember once he said, "If the day comes when you don't wake up, I won't know what to tell our daughter." I laughed and told him that by then, Ilari would still be too young to remember her mother's face. He said nothing. And just as fate had written, when Ilari was only 4, he died in an accident delivering wood. A plank fell from the truck and struck his head. They said he went quickly without pain. But for me that pain lasted the rest of my life. After he was gone, my daughter and I moved to a poor neighborhood in the southern part of the city, a place full of cracked alleys where every afternoon someone's old radio told forgotten stories. I lived on a small allowance and by sewing clothes for others. The old illness still followed me, but I dared not fall because if I collapsed, there would be no one left to carry my daughter to school, to teach her how to spell, to tell her stories about the father she only knew through a small photograph. I remember rainy nights when the roof leaked. I would place buckets to catch the water while Ilari curled up beside me and whispered, "Mom, the rain will stop tomorrow." Her voice was soft, comforting, and yet it pierced my heart like a needle. I didn't know where she learned such patience. Maybe from me, the woman who learned to stay silent, to hide her cough so her child could sleep through the night. Ilari grew up quickly while I aged along with my medicine bottles. She was bright, quick-witted, with a way of speaking that made people both love and fear her a little. I used to think that if she studied well and had a future, then my life would not have been wasted. But I forgot children who grow up in scarcity need more than food and clothing. They need a place to learn love and trust. I didn't know how to teach her that. I was too busy keeping myself from falling apart, from choking, from coughing blood whenever the weather changed. I taught my daughter to be strong, to do everything on her own, to never trust easily, and perhaps those words planted a seed of coldness in her heart. At 17, Ilari began spending more time away from home. She stopped telling me about her friends, stopped letting me braid her hair, stopped asking what I wanted for dinner. I noticed the change but told myself, maybe all youth is like that, until one night she came home late, smelling of strange perfume, a smudge of lipstick still on her lips. I looked at her but said nothing. She set her bag down on the table. Avoiding my eyes, I only asked one question. "Have you eaten?" She said, "Yes." Her voice was calm, too calm. But within that calmness I heard distance. A distance I knew. Just one more step, and I would never be able to pull her back. I remember that morning clearly. The day I realized my daughter had gone farther than I imagined. I was hanging laundry on the balcony when I saw her sitting on the steps, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes hollow. The sunlight fell across her hair, making her face look pale and beautiful in a haunting way. I sat beside her and asked softly, "What's wrong, my dear?" She stayed quiet for a long while, then said, "I think I've done something wrong, Mom." Before I could ask, she broke down crying, her tears falling onto my dry, bony hands. It was the first time I'd seen her cry in years. In those sobs, I understood everything without needing words, and in that morning light, something inside me broke. Part love, part fear. I was afraid she had stepped onto a road from which she could never return. In the days that followed, Ilari spoke less, avoided going out, often sat for hours by the window. I didn't dare ask. My illness grew worse then. Coughing fits lasting through the night. I knew I didn't have much strength left. Some mornings I felt dizzy just trying to fold the blanket for her. She would see me quietly take over and make the bed herself. In her eyes, I saw guilt mixed with a strange kind of resolve. And then one evening while I was cooking porridge, she came out of her room carrying a small bag. "I'm going to a study group," she said. I nodded. But that night she didn't come back. I stayed awake, sitting on the chair, staring out the window. The city at night was frighteningly quiet. Rain began to fall, the drops tapping against the glass like someone knocking to deliver bad news. I don't know when I dozed off. When I woke, it was morning, and only a faint trace of her perfume lingered in the air. 3 days later, I received news. Ilari was with a group of people the neighbors called the city's underworld. I didn't believe it. It couldn't be my daughter, the same child who used to cling to my hand, too afraid to sleep alone. How could she? But I had to believe it when she called me herself, her voice trembling. "Mom, I'm fine. I just want to live differently for a while," I said. "Come home. I won't be angry." But on the other end, there was only her breathing, and then silence. I began living my days in fear. Every morning, I sat by the window watching strangers pass, hoping one face would be hers. I cooked porridge, then turned off the stove. No one to eat it. I turned on the radio, listening to the news. Her name never came up, but every time I heard about a fight or an arrest, my heart clenched tight. I lived that way for almost a year, until one day, when my illness returned worse than ever. I was hospitalized, and Ilari came back. She walked into the room wearing a black coat, thin and pale, a long scratch across her neck. I didn't ask anything. I just held her hand. That hand was cold, cold like metal. She sat down, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, I need to ask you something." Her voice trembled like a child afraid of being scolded for breaking a bowl. "Can you keep my child for me?" I turned my head, thinking I'd misheard. "Your child?" I asked. She nodded, tears dripping onto the white blanket. "I'm too young, Mom. I need to go back to school. I need to start over." I stayed silent. Inside me rose a flood of emotions: love, anger, sorrow, and a strange, faint relief. I didn't know what to say. I just looked at my daughter, the face I'd once been so proud of, now lined with hardship. I asked softly, "Where's the baby's father?" She bowed her head and whispered, "I don't know." I sighed and turned away so she wouldn't see my tears. Perhaps life always circles like this. A mother gives birth, the daughter bears a child, and mistakes become scars that only change places but never disappear. I nodded and said only one sentence. All right. I'll keep the baby. Ilari looked up, her red-rimmed eyes trembling, voice breaking. Thank you, Mom. I smiled, a small, quiet smile, and within it, I knew I was stepping into a new chapter of my life. A chapter where I would be a mother again, a grandmother, and once more, a woman who endures. I still remember the first night the baby and I slept together. He was tiny, barely larger than a handful, his skin wrinkled, his breathing as faint as smoke. I placed him on my chest, listening to the small heartbeat thudding inside him, and in that moment, I felt myself come alive again. Perhaps God had given me another chance, one more time to be a mother. Even though almost all my strength had been spent, I named the baby Milo, after a character from an old book I'd read when I was young. I believed that name would bring him luck, a gentle name with a glimmer of light amid the dark days. During the first few weeks, Ilari still stayed with me, helping to make milk, change diapers, and hum lullabies. But only a few weeks later, she began going out more often. She said she was going to school, to look for work, to meet friends. I didn't ask questions. Every time she left, I only said, "Take your coat, it's cold out there." And she would just nod faintly. There were nights she came home late, and nights she didn't come home at all. I didn't speak, didn't scold. I only held Milo close and rocked him until his cries faded into the dark. My house was at the end of a narrow dead-end alley, where the streetlight often flickered. Across the way was a row of rented rooms for migrant workers. They came home late, laughing loudly, sometimes arguing about electricity bills. I'd grown used to those sounds. They were like the heartbeat of the neighborhood, messy, weary, but alive. Every morning, when sunlight streamed through the window bars and fell across Milo's face, I felt my heart soften again. He looked so much like Ilari when she was small, deep eyes, slightly curved lips, and that way of gripping my finger so tightly as if afraid I might disappear. And so, day after day, I raised him with everything I had left. My fingers became rough from washing diapers. My back ached every time I bent down. The coughs came regularly, like clockwork, especially at night. Sometimes I thought I couldn't go on any longer, but every time I heard Milo mumble in his sleep, I found another reason to live one more day. I thought, maybe this was the only thread still tying me to the world. A tiny life that needed the warmth of my arms. A year passed, and Ilari was almost never home. When she did come, she looked thinner, her hair dyed, her lips painted dark, her voice changed. Whenever I mentioned Milo, she only smiled and said, "You take care of him better than I ever could." Her words pierced me, but I stayed calm. I didn't want to frighten her, nor make her feel ashamed. I only hoped that one day, she would realize that a mother's love can never be replaced, no matter how many sweet words she might hear from others out there. One February morning, when the air was so cold that people's breaths turned to mist, Ilari walked into the room holding a small bundle. I was sitting by the window with Milo in my arms. He had just learned to babble the word "ba," grandmother, in a trembling, tiny voice that still warmed the heart. Ilari looked at the child, then at me, her eyes a mix of tenderness and exhaustion. "Mom," she said softly, "I have news." I put Milo down in the cradle. She took a deep breath, then said it. I'm pregnant again." I froze. Not from shock, from fear. I looked at my daughter, the same one who once promised she would start over, and I saw the circle of fate repeating itself, like an old song playing endlessly. I didn't ask who the father was. I knew that if she wanted to tell me, she already would have. I only asked, "What will you do?" She stayed silent. In that silence, I heard the wind slip through the cracks in the window, carrying the damp smell of earth. Finally, she whispered, "Will you keep the baby for me again? Just for a while?" I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my hands, trembling blue veins rising beneath thin skin, marked by age, illness, and sleepless nights. I wanted to say no. I wanted to scream that I had no strength left, that I'd given my whole life for her, that I was tired, that I too needed rest. But when Ilari grasped my hand, I saw in her eyes the exact same look I once had, the look I gave when I begged the doctors to save her father in the hospital, that pleading, desperate look that shatters the heart. And so, I nodded. The second baby was born on a rainy morning. Rain beat on the metal roof, each drop heavy like an unanswered question. I stood in the delivery room, hearing Ilari's faint groans, then the thin but real cry of new life. I looked at the baby, small as a fragile flower, and my heart filled with both fear and tenderness. She named him Leo, meaning lion, she said, because she wanted him to be stronger than she was. I smiled, but tears streamed down my face. In that moment, I knew that no matter how much pain life had given me, The love I felt for these children was the one thing that remained whole within me. I still remember the first night the baby and I slept together. He was tiny, barely bigger than a fist, his skin wrinkled, his breath faint as smoke. I placed him on my chest, listening to the small heartbeat thumping fast, and in that moment, I felt myself come alive again. Perhaps God had given me another chance, a chance to be a mother once more, even though most of my strength was already gone. I named the baby Milo, after a character in an old book I had read when I was young. I believed that name would bring him luck, a gentle name with a glimmer of light in the midst of dark days. In the first few weeks, Ilari stayed with me, helping prepare milk, change diapers, and sing lullabies. But only a few weeks later, she began going out more often. She said she was going to study, to look for work, to meet friends that I didn't ask. Every time I saw her leave, I would just say, "Take your coat, it's cold." And she would only nod faintly. Some nights, she came home late. Some nights, she didn't come home at all. I didn't say a word, didn't scold her. I just quietly held Milo and rocked him until his cries faded into the darkness. My house sat at the end of a dead-end alley, where the streetlight often flickered. Across from it was a row of rental rooms for migrant workers who came home late, laughing loudly, sometimes arguing about the electricity bill. That I got used to those sounds. They were like the heartbeat of the neighborhood. Chaotic, tired, but alive. Every morning, when sunlight passed through the window bars and landed on Milo's face, my heart softened. He looked so much like Ilari as a child. Deep eyes, gently curved lips, and that way of gripping my finger so tightly, as if afraid I might disappear. And so, day after day, I cared for him with everything I had left. My fingers grew callous from washing diapers. My back ached endlessly each time I bent down. The coughing fits came regularly, especially at night. Sometimes I thought I couldn't go on any longer. But whenever I heard Milo whimper in his sleep, I found another reason to live one more day. I thought, perhaps that was the only thing that still bound me to this world. A small life that needed the warmth of my arms. A year passed and Ilari was hardly ever home. When she returned, she was thinner, her hair dyed, lips painted dark red. Her voice changed. Whenever I mentioned Milo, she would just smile and say, "You take care of him better than I ever could." My heart ached, but I stayed calm. I didn't want to frighten her, nor make her ashamed. I only hoped that one day, she would realize that a mother's love can never be replaced, no matter how many sweet words others might whisper to her. One February morning, when it was so cold you could see people's breath turn into mist, Ilari walked into the room holding a small bundle. I was sitting by the window, rocking Milo. He had just learned to say "Grandma," a tiny, trembling voice, but so warm. Ilari looked at him, then at me, her eyes full of both love and exhaustion. "Mom," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." I laid Milo down in the cradle. She took a deep breath, then said, I'm pregnant again." I froze, not out of shock, but out of fear. I looked at my daughter, the girl who had promised to rebuild her life, and I saw a circle of fate repeating itself, like an old song played on loop. I didn't ask who the father was. I knew if she wanted to tell me, she would have already done so. I only asked, "What are you going to do?" She said nothing. In that silence, I could hear the wind slipping through the crack in the window, carrying the damp smell of earth. Finally, she said, "Can you keep this one for me too, Mom? Just for a while." I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my hands, trembling fingers, green veins bulging, marked by age, illness, and sleepless nights. I wanted to say no, to scream that I had no strength left, that I had sacrificed my whole life for her, that I was tired, that I too deserved rest. But when Ilari took my hands, I saw in her eyes the same look I had once had, the look I gave when begging the doctors to save my husband in the hospital. A pleading, desperate look that broke the heart. And so, I nodded again. The second baby was born on a rainy morning. Rain fell on the tin roof, each drop heavy like an unanswered question. I stood in the delivery room, listening to Ilari's faint groans, then the sound of a newborn's cry, weak but real. I looked at the baby, small as a thin flower stem, and felt both love and worry. She named him Leo, meaning lion, she said, because she wanted him to be stronger than she was. I smiled, but tears streamed down my face. In that moment, I knew that no matter how much pain life had given me, the love I held for these children was the only thing in me that remained whole. After giving birth, Ilari left. She said she would come back when things were stable. But I knew stable was a luxury in her life. In the years that followed, it was only me, Milo, and Leo. The two grew up in the small house, surrounded by the sound of the radio and the smell of medicine that I taught them to speak, to call me grandma, to laugh when they were sad. Some days I sat on the porch watching them run around, their laughter echoing bright and clear, and I felt as if my heart were young again. But every night, when I looked out the window, my heart grew empty. I missed Ilari. I missed my daughter. Not because she was the mother of these children, but because she was the only child I ever had. 7 years passed. Ilari never returned. I only heard of her through acquaintances, that she had married a wealthy man named Eric, that she lived in another city, that she never mentioned me or the 2 children. Hearing that felt like someone tightening a fist around my heart. But then I would look at Milo and Leo, growing strong, polite, and affectionate, hugging me every night, and I thought, perhaps this was the greatest reward of my life. I never expected that another turn of fate was waiting ahead, one that began with a small lottery ticket and ended in a lawsuit that shook the whole city. But that was later. For now, in this small room where sunlight filters through the curtains, I still sit by the window with 2 sleeping grandchildren in my arms, listening to the wind blowing past the old houses. The wind carries the scent of ash, of rain, of dreams that never took shape, and I, a woman who has walked through almost an entire lifetime, only hope that if those dreams are ever reborn, they will choose a gentler place to stay. The winters here have a certain sound, not the kind you hear, but the kind you feel. The creak of old wood, the whistle of air through window gaps, the way silence expands after dusk like it's trying to swallow the house. I've grown used to it. The children sleep early. I stay up, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, counting the seconds between coughs that come and go like waves. Time moves slower when you live inside the same 4 walls for too long. Milo turned 8 that year. Leo was 6. They had the same laugh, quick, bright, and unafraid of echo. Every morning they'd sit by the kitchen table, their knees barely touching the floor, arguing about who got the bigger slice of bread. The house would fill with the sound of life, the kind that forgives everything. I'd watch them and forget how quiet my own heart had become. Money was always short, but you learn to stretch it the way you stretch hope, thin but somehow enough. I worked the vegetable stall near the end of the market, my fingers red from cold mornings and damp lettuce. People called me Miss Ilatra with a good smile. Maybe they thought I needed that name more than the truth. Sometimes between customers, I'd catch myself looking toward the road that led to the city. I never saw her, not once in 7 years. But I imagined her, Ilari, walking down some bright street, holding someone's hand, pretending the past was just a dream she'd woken from. I wondered if she ever thought of Milo's small hands reaching for her, or the way Leo would cry her name in his sleep. I hoped she did. The days blurred. Years folded into one another like old letters left unread. I found peace in small rituals, boiling tea until the room smelled of ginger, counting the coins at night, ironing the boys' school shirts even when I was too tired to stand. These were my prayers, ordinary acts, repeated until they became the shape of my faith. The first time I heard the word lottery that winter, it came from a voice as cracked as mine. An old man selling tickets stopped by my stall. "Buy one, ma'am," he said. "Luck likes to hide in tired hands." I almost laughed. My hands have done enough. But I still took a ticket. Habit maybe. Or the stubbornness of someone who refuses to stop believing in miracles, even the small, foolish kind. Days later, I was making soup when the radio listed the winning numbers. I didn't plan to check, until my eyes caught the first 3 digits. They matched. Then the next 2. And the last one. For a moment the world tilted. The spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the pot. I sat down on the floor, holding that small piece of paper like it might catch fire. "For $1 million. I whispered it once, then again slower, as if saying it would make it less absurd. Outside, the neighborhood went on as always. A dog barking, someone arguing about rent, the same sun dragging across the same sky. Inside, everything had changed and nothing had. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. The next morning, I met my sister Mara, the only person who still came by without needing a reason. I showed her the ticket. She stared, mouth open, then laughed so hard she cried. "You see," she said, "even God gets bored of your bad luck sometimes." Collecting the money didn't feel real. Signing the papers, shaking the banker's hand. It was all like playing a part in someone else's story. The first thing I did was pay my debts. I went to everyone who had helped me: the fish seller who once slipped an extra piece into my bag, the woman who lent me medicine when Leo had fever. Some of them refused. Some hugged me. I told them, "You once believed I'd get through it. Now let me believe in you." Then I bought a house. Not big, just steady, with windows that didn't rattle, and a small yard where the boys could run. When we moved in, I watched Milo race Leo up the stairs, shouting, laughing. The sound of their feet on wood was the purest thing I'd ever heard. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without waking up to cough. The house came with a garden, dry soil, tangled weeds, a few stubborn violets. I spent weeks bringing it back to life. My hands bled, my back ached, but when the first sprout of green pushed through, I felt something bloom inside me too. I told myself this would be enough. The rest of my life could be quiet, uneventful, even dull, and that would be fine. But quiet never lasts long in my world. It was late afternoon when the bell rang. I was watering the plants, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. When I opened the door, the past stood there. Ilari, 7 years older, thinner, her hair tied too tight, her smile practiced. Beside her was a man in a navy suit, holding her elbow like he owned it. "Mother," she said softly, as if the word might break between her teeth. "It's me." I froze. For a heartbeat, the garden noise disappeared. No birds, no wind, no breath. She looked the same and not the same. The eyes were hers, but they didn't shine. I didn't move. The man stepped forward, extending his hand. "I'm Eric," he said. "Ilari's husband." His voice had that tone people use when they expect to be respected before earning it. I shook his hand because I didn't know what else to do. It felt cold, dry, businesslike. Ilari looked past me, toward the yard where Milo and Leo were playing. Her eyes softened. "They've grown," she whispered. I didn't answer. She smiled anyway, a small, trembling thing. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside. They walked in like people visiting a museum. Cautious, polite, slightly uncomfortable. Eric glanced around the living room, taking in the framed drawings, the modest furniture. "You've done well," he said. I didn't know if it was praise or surprise. We sat. Tea between us. The silence was thick like fog. "I heard about your good fortune," Ilari began. Her voice tried to sound casual, but there was something underneath. A tremor, a hunger. "For $1 million, that's incredible." I looked at her. "You heard right." She hesitated, then leaned forward, her eyes glistening. "Mother, we've had some hard years. Business went bad. Eric lost his firm. We just need a little help to get back on our feet." There it was. The real reason. Not guilt. Not love. Need. I kept my voice calm. "You've been gone 7 years. Not a word. Not a letter. And now you're here for money." Her face tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I said, "it's not. But it's true." Eric cleared his throat. "Mrs. Vance, surely you can understand. Family helps family." I smiled, small and tired. Family also stays when times are bad. The air went cold. Ilari's eyes filled with something. Shame, anger, I couldn't tell. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I was trying to survive." "So was I said. She looked toward the garden again, where Milo's laughter floated through the open window. For a moment, her face softened, then hardened again. "If you won't help us," she said quietly, "you'll regret it." It sounded like a threat wrapped in a plea. I didn't answer. She stood, grabbed Eric's arm, and left without another word. I stood at the doorway long after they disappeared down the street. The smell of rain was still in the air, but it felt different now, heavier, like a warning. That night, when I tucked the boys into bed, Leo asked, "Who was that lady?" I said, "Just someone who used to live here." He nodded, already half asleep. Milo turned toward me. "You're not sad, are you, Grandma?" I smiled. "No, my dear. Just remembering." But when the lights went out, I sat in the dark, listening to the sound of their breathing, and I knew the quiet days were over. The days after their visit felt unreal, like I'd dreamed them. The house looked the same, the boys laughed the same, but the air had changed. Every sound carried an echo of something unspoken. Milo asked once if the lady who came was a friend that I told him. She used to be someone important. He seemed satisfied with that, but Leo wasn't. He said. She looked like you, Grandma. I smiled and said nothing. Children see too much. For a while nothing happened. Then the letters started coming, short, typed, signed with Eric's neat hand. They began politely. We hope you're well, perhaps we can discuss family arrangements. Then they sharpened. Ilari has rights. You're withholding the children. And finally the last one, if you don't cooperate we will take legal action. I showed them to my sister Mara. She read each page, folded them carefully and said, "They smell of desperation." I wanted to believe she was right, that they were only trying to scare me. But something in the phrasing, precise, rehearsed, told me this wasn't just about fear. It was about control. I didn't reply. Silence is sometimes the only language left for people like me. But silence has its cost. 2 weeks later, a man knocked on my door, thin suit, polished shoes, voice of someone paid to sound calm. He handed me a legal envelope. Inside, a summons. Ilari and Eric were suing me for custody interference and emotional distress. They wanted $1 million in damages. For a long time I just stared at the words. The letters blurred. The paper felt heavy, like it carried every year I'd spent keeping those boys fed and safe. When I finally looked up, the light outside had changed, golden, tired. The sound of children playing in the yard reached me like something from another world. Mara was furious. You raised those kids when she vanished. How dare she? I stopped her. Don't waste your anger, I said. It won't feed anyone. I hired a lawyer, a quiet man named Drayton who smelled faintly of old books and coffee. He listened to my story without interrupting, then said, "We'll need proof. Letters, messages, witnesses." I had all of it. Every note Ilari sent asking me to care for the children. Even the one where she promised to come back and never did. He nodded. Then you have nothing to fear. But fear doesn't need reason to exist. He lives in the corners of rooms, behind the sound of knocking, in the silence of phones that might ring. The hearing took place in late autumn. The courthouse smelled of dust and old wood. Ilari sat across the aisle, hair sleek, lips painted, eyes fixed on something just behind me. Eric beside her, whispering into her ear. I tried not to look at them, but it's hard not to stare at your own mistakes wearing perfume. When the judge entered, everyone stood. His robe swayed like a curtain closing on a bad play. The lawyers spoke, their words sharp as knives dulled by repetition. They said I'd abducted the children, alienated them from their mother. I sat still, hands clasped, and thought of Milo's laugh, Leo's drawings taped to the fridge. If love could testify, I wouldn't need a lawyer. Drayton stood and began his defense. He laid the letters on the table one by one. Proof of abandonment, proof of intent, proof of 7 years of silence. He spoke softly, almost kindly, as if explaining to a child why the truth sometimes hurts. When it was my turn, I stood. The room swayed for a second, then steadied. I didn't steal anyone, I said. I just stayed when everyone else left. Ilari wouldn't look at me. Her hands trembled in her lap. For a moment, I thought I saw something like regret. Then Eric leaned close, whispered something, and it vanished. The judge said he'd review the evidence and adjourned outside. The wind had picked up. Leaves swirled around the courthouse steps like restless ghosts. Mara held my arm as we walked to the car. She said, "Whatever happens, you've already won the only thing that matters." But the world doesn't always agree with what matters. A week later, someone broke into my yard. The gate latch was twisted, the back door open. Nothing was stolen, but the boys' room had been searched, drawers pulled out, clothes tossed. Leo's teddy bear lay on the floor. One button I missing. He cried for hours. I called the police. They filed a report. Shrug said it was probably kids. But I knew better. It felt like a warning. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching headlights pass like ghosts of choices I'd made. 3 a.m. My phone buzzed. A message. Next time we take them for real. No name. No number. Just those words. I didn't tell the boys. The next day I walked them to school myself, stayed until the bell rang, waited across the street until the last light in the classroom turned off. Fear makes you practical. Drayton urged me to report it, but I refused. I'd spent too many years being a problem for someone else to fix. This was mine to carry. For a few weeks, nothing. Then one afternoon, the kind of afternoon that pretends to be peaceful, The boys didn't come home. The teacher said they'd left on time. The street was empty. The air seemed too still. My hand started to shake. I called everyone, neighbors, police, even Mara. We searched until night swallowed the town. When the call finally came, it wasn't the police. A man's voice, calm, careful. If you want to see them again, bring the money. 1 million. No police. Then silence. My knees gave out. I dropped the phone. Mara caught me before I hit the floor. Somewhere inside, a small, cold part of me thought, they really believe I'd choose money over them. The hours that followed blurred into sirens, flashlights, questions, but the police found nothing that night. That I barely remember breathing. It was nearly dawn when I heard the knock, soft, hesitant. That I opened the door, and there they were. Milo and Leo, dirty, trembling but alive. They ran to me, clinging so tightly I could hardly breathe. Through their tears I caught fragments. A car, the woods, someone arguing, a door left unlocked. They had escaped when the kidnappers fought. By noon, the police had found the van. Inside, traces of rope, food wrappers, a phone registered to a Rick Vance Realty Group. 2 arrests were made that day. The trial was short. Evidence spoke louder than any apology. Eric got 6 months for attempted extortion and unlawful restraint. Ilari's charges were reduced after she confessed he'd planned it all. She served community service instead of prison. When the verdict was read, she looked at me for the first time in years. Her eyes were hollow, her face pale. I never meant, she began, but the words fell apart. I turned away. There was nothing left to mend. Afterward, life didn't return to what it was. It simply quieted. The boys went back to school. Mara moved in with me for a while. The house smelled of ginger tea and disinfectant again. One evening, as I was folding laundry, the phone rang. It was Ilari. She said she was out, working, sober, trying to rebuild. She asked if she could see the boys, just from a distance. I said yes. That Sunday she came. She stood across the street, behind the fence. The boys were in the yard, chasing each other through the garden. She didn't call out, she just watched, arms folded, eyes wet, smile trembling. When she finally turned away, the wind lifted her hair like a small mercy. I didn't stop her. Some distances can't be crossed by walking. That night I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the house humming softly around me. The stars were faint, washed out by the city lights. I thought of everything that had happened, the sickness, the years, the trial, the money, the noise of it all, and realized that what survived wasn't anger or sorrow. It was something quieter, the kind of forgiveness that didn't need words. Peace doesn't arrive with a sound. It slips in when the world is too tired to resist. Months passed after the trial, and the house finally began to breathe again. I could hear it in the mornings, the soft clatter of dishes, the scrape of chairs, the creak of wood expanding in sunlight. Even silence, once heavy, had grown gentle. Mara moved out once she knew I could stand on my own. She left a note on the table. You deserve ordinary days now. I smiled when I read it. Ordinary, what a strange, beautiful word. I started a small center in town. Not an office, just a remodeled part of my house with new paint and second-hand chairs. Women came, the kind who had nowhere left to go. They sat at my kitchen table, their hands wrapped around cups of tea, their eyes scanning the walls like they were afraid to look at me. I didn't offer advice. I offered quiet. Sometimes that's all survival needs. A space where no one asks, why didn't you leave sooner? The newspapers wrote a small piece about it. Lottery winner builds haven for struggling women. I didn't like the word winner. Luck is just another word for timing. If that old man hadn't stopped by my stall, if the wind had blown a different way, none of it would have happened. But maybe that's the point. The universe sometimes corrects itself in whispers. Milo turned 15, taller than me now, always carrying a notebook full of drawings. He wants to be an architect. When I asked why, he said, because I like the idea of building things that don't fall apart. Leo, 12, still laughs too loud, still runs like the ground might disappear. He plays the piano every evening. The notes spill into the street, soft and unsteady, like the world practicing forgiveness. We don't talk about their mother much. They know pieces of the story, enough to hold compassion without losing clarity. Sometimes they ask, do you think she'll come back? And I tell them, she already has, in the way you two laugh. Ilari writes once in a while. Her letters are short, careful, like someone learning to use words again. She never asks for money, never excuses what happened. The last one ended with, I'm working at a small cafe. I make the morning coffee. It feels good to do something that begins the day for someone else that I kept that one on the fridge. I see her sometimes from afar. She passes by on her way to work, glancing at the garden. Once she left a bouquet by the gate, white lilies, her favorite when she was a child. She didn't knock. I watched from the window as she walked away. Her shoulders straighter than I remembered. There was peace in that. My health has steadied. The doctors call it manageable. I walk slower now, but every step feels like something reclaimed. When the pain flares, I sit by the window, watch the light crawl across the floor, and remind myself, I am still here. Alive is a quiet word, but it holds so much. On weekends, the center fills with laughter. Women cooking together, children chasing each other through the yard. We hang clothes on the same line, their colors waving like flags of a small, stubborn country that refuses to disappear. Sometimes I look at them and think, this is what safety looks like, not walls or locks, but people who choose to stay. One evening, near spring, the city lost power. The whole neighborhood went dark except for candles flickering through windows. The boys were at the piano, their faces lit by flame. They played softly, an old lullaby I used to hum when they were babies outside. The night pressed close, but the house glowed from within. That I felt the air, warm and full of sound, and realized, the light we make is enough. Later, when the power returned, I stepped onto the porch. The sky was wide and clean, the stars finally visible. That I thought about the years, the sickness, the noise of sirens, the papers signed by judges and lawyers, the weight of both love and law. That I thought about how everything I once feared had already happened, and yet here I was, still holding tea in my hand, still breathing. Milo came out and sat beside me. He said, "Grandma, do you ever wish things were different?" I looked at him, this boy who had seen too much and still believed in kindness, and said, "Sometimes. But if they were, you might not be here." He smiled, the same small crooked smile his mother used to have when she was 5. The garden swayed under the wind. The scent of soil, of rain waiting to fall. The city hummed in the distance, unaware of the small miracles happening in this quiet house. I closed my eyes and listened, to the laughter, the music, the heartbeat of a place rebuilt not with money, but with the stubbornness to care. Every life, I realized, has a center. Not the loud, shining part that people write about, but the stillness that remains after everything else burns away. That's where love hides, that's where I live now. And if tomorrow never comes, that's all right. Tonight, there is light in every room. And it is enough.